three beers: Budweiser, Miller, Coors. You can find these in almost every corner in America. But how did that happen? How did three lager brands become a part of our stadiums, restaurants, advertisements, family gatherings, refrigerators, and national identity? Like, why do these beers that look so simple require so much precision to make? In 2026, Budweiser is actually celebrating 150 years. So this feels like the right moment to revisit a much bigger question. What did the big three truly build? This is not going to be a macro versus a craft video. It's not a beer ranking, especially. And it's not like an argument that everyone should suddenly replace their favorite local beer with a case of domestic beer. This is the story of immigration, agriculture, technology, prohibition, marketing, brewing science, and changing the American drinker. This is the story of how Budweiser became the national king, how Miller made beer feel like a celebration, and how Coors turned the American West into a beer identity. And more importantly, it's the story of how these beers built part of that stage that modern craft beer eventually inherited. Domestic beer built the stage, craft beer turned up the volume. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Tapped In here at Brewbods and Barbells, where we lift pints and weights. And today we're talking about the beer that built America. We're going to be discussing these big three that I have on my desk today. I have Budweiser, I have Miller High Life, and I got Coors Banquet. Now, this isn't going to be a tasting video. It's not going to be which one's better or which one wins. I just want to understand why these three mattered. Because the longer I've spent in beer, the more I realize something. Simple beer is not always easy beer. In fact, a clean American lager can be incredibly unforgiving. When a beer built around a light body, gentle malt character, clean fermentation, that clean, crisp pop of carbonation that everybody likes, like there's not much room to make a mistake. A bold beer can surround you with flavor. A clean lager has such a narrow window to hit for you to like enjoy and notice that something might be wrong, right? The body has to be right. The carbonation's got to be on point. The packaging has to protect it just right, and the brewery themselves, they have to repeat this on a massive scale over and over again, batch after batch. The drinker may not know every technical reason why something tastes different, like a lot of the craft beer fans, but the drinker usually knows when the beer is not what they expected. And that's the first thing definitely want to establish here today. These beers did not become successful because nobody cared how they tasted. They became successful partly because millions of people knew exactly what they were expecting them to taste like. Like, delivering on the expectation consistently is a serious brewing accomplishment that should not be overlooked. While researching this episode that I'm building today, I spoke with a production professional familiar with a large scale Anheuser-Busch brewing. What stood out to me was how much of the conversation came back to control: yeast quality, fermentation, air injection, sensory analysis, making small adjustments while protecting a very specific final result. The challenge is not simply making one good beer, it's making the same beer again in enormous tanks under enormous production schedule and keeping it recognizable, right? That changed how I looked at the entire category personally. I'm used to a lot of the craft beer side where it's a lot smaller organizations, but brewing precision is only half of this story I'm covering today. These beers also arrived at the exact moment America was becoming capable of building national brands. And to understand that, we need to go back before any of these bottles had crowns, mountains, or champagne style packaging. During the 19th century, millions of German immigrants came to the United States, bringing that brewing tradition with them that we all know and love today. Among those traditions were lager. Compared with many of the ales commonly brewed here in America at the time, lager required that cooler fermentation and careful storage. It also produced a cleaner, smoother beer that found a growing audience in the American cities. That technology, like, took a hold of everything and then definitely made possibilities possible, right? Artificial refrigeration allowed breweries to control the temperatures more reliably, stuff that you're used to now. Railroads allowed beer to travel further. Improved packaging and distribution helped move beer beyond one neighborhood or one city, which was a huge advantage in that time. Local brewing could now become regional brewing. Regional could now become national. And one company in St. Louis saw the future very clearly. Budweiser was introduced in 1876 with an ambitious idea behind it: create a beer that could appeal across regional tastes and become truly national American brand, right? And think about how bold that was at the time, especially. America did not yet have one unified beer culture. Different areas had different tastes, ingredients, traditions. Budweiser's answer was a lager designed around balance, consistency, and broad drinkability. Like the recipe I have pulled up right here today. Let me jump on over. So on here, you got on their website, us.budweiser.com/Budweiser, ingredients. You got the barley, the water, the rice, and the hops, right? Rice supports the clean, polished character of the beer. It helps create a lighter body and crisp finish while like allowing that beer to remain recognizable as Budweiser. This is not an absence of decision. This is the decision. And the national strategy obviously worked. Budweiser did not merely become popular, it helped shape what generations of Americans pictured when they heard the word beer. And the throwback with this style cans are really nice. You get that nice gold, clear, cold consistency. Easy to recognize. Everyone knows what they're looking at when they see a Budweiser. There's no surprise there. Um, and a Budweiser eventually became the king of beers, and that title captured both its scale and its confidence. But here's where the story becomes much more complicated. Budweiser's greatest strength was familiarity. A production professional um, described it to me in a way that stuck, right? For one generation, Budweiser became associated with their father's beer. For a younger generation, it may increasingly feel connected to their grandfather's beer. That's not criticism of it, it's just a question of cultural positioning. And so the beer did not suddenly forget how to be Budweiser. The drinker and the world around the beer changed. That distinction matters. A brand can lose cultural dominance while the product itself remains respected, technically, technically sounded and historically important. And Budweiser may not hold that same crown in every younger drinker's mind, but it remains one of those defining American lagers. And one part of its production has probably caused the most misunderstanding than almost anything else is right here at the top. So on the top of these cans, they talk about beechwood aging. And when people hear that phrase, they picture wood flavor or a barrel character, kind of like the craft beer fans are known for. That's not the purpose on this. Budweiser is not trying to taste like a barrel aged beer. It creates additional surface for the yeast as the beer develops and finishes. The phrase sounds romantic. The function is very technical, though. And that combination tells us something important about them as a company. Its public identity was built through powerful storytelling. Everyone knows about the Clydesdales, and underneath that story is a very tightly controlled brewing process. They built the national crown, but it is not writing America's beer story alone. Because now we're going to talk about the next one. Miller entered the conversation. with a completely different idea of what beer could represent. Miller High Life was introduced in 1903 in a clear champagne shaped bottle. And that was super unique. And the packaging was not like a random decoration either. It positioned beer as something that could belong at the table and be a part of the celebration. That's why their phrase, the champagne of beers, remains such an effective identity for them. And they also did a repackaging. So like they've really leaned into like a lot more of that classy touch to it. They got rid of like the darker red and they went with like a lighter tone. They definitely harped on the Lady with the Moon. They definitely did a nice little rebrand on this stuff. And so it offered a much more accessible version of the occasion, I would say. A celebration did not need to be exclusive. A good moment did not need to be expensive. And like high life could bring a sense of occasion into ordinary American life. Budweiser built the authority. Miller High Life built aspiration. And decades later, Miller would help force another major change. By the 1970s, American consumers were beginning to think differently about calories, moderation, and how long they, wanted to remain social during occasion. Does that sound familiar? It kind of sounds like now. So, like you see these dips and these rises in how the industry is working. Like Miller Lite. Ironically, I actually have one. I was gifted these, so I got that too. And so, by the like they reached the national market in 1975 and proved that light beer could become a major mainstream category. It was a great idea because now look at what the market has. It was not like a simple like new packaging. It changed the competitive landscape entirely. The question was no longer whether people would drink light beer. The question was which brewery would own that drinker. And Bud Light arrived in 1982 uh, from the Budweiser side. And so they were behind that one. But a production professional described to me as a strategic answer to a simple threat. Like, how does Anheuser-Busch keep Budweiser drinkers from moving to Miller Lite? This is what makes the light beer era so important, and I think a lot of breweries need to definitely pay attention to this because the the breweries were no longer competing through heritage anymore. They were competing for those changing occasions. The consumer wanted something lighter. The brands adapted to it. Miller showed that American beer culture could change quickly. And while Budweiser and Miller battled for the national drinker, another beer was building an identity around one very specific place: Golden, Colorado. Coors here built their traces back in 1873. And I love they leave them on the cans too, so everybody knows. And when Adolf Coors opened a brewery out of Golden, the location became central to the beer's identity, which is pretty smart. When Budweiser represented national reach and Miller represented the celebration and reinvention, Coors represented that American West. The Rockies were not merely like a backdrop, they became a part of the story people purchased. Sound familiar? Coors Banquet felt rooted in a place. That matters because beer has always carried like geographical sides with it, like the water, the landscape, the workers, the that local mythology, right? Today, craft breweries often build their identities around the neighborhoods, the streets, the towns, the farms, and the regional culture. Like Coors was already demonstrating how powerful a place could become when attached to a national beer brand, which is why, like I've met a lot of brewers and they still enjoy these beers for the respect of that. And so like Budweiser had the crown, right? They got the crown right there. They got the crown, right? Miller had the occasion, and yeah, Coors literally had the mountains, and the Coors Light. So yeah, everyone knows that, and yeah, we're going right back to the mountains, and so three brands, three distinct ideas of America. Then America made their product illegal. Prohibition did not simply put the beer industry on pause. It literally destroyed most of it. Breweries closed, workers lost jobs, local beer cultures completely disappeared. The companies that survived had to become something else enough to even remain alive. Something similar, not obviously not any close, but like back in 2019, 2020, where the breweries had to adapt to the changing aspect, right? Um, like the some produce like near beer, which is like it's like a super low beer. Others sold like malt products, yeast, soft drinks, or whatever else their facilities like could make legally. So when like the prohibition ended, so I'm gonna jump over here. I'll actually the Smithsonian Magazine, how some breweries survived prohibition. This is a great read on their website. Um, I genuinely thought this was super informative. So like this definitely killed a lot of things. Now, when prohibition ended, like the American brewing industry did not return to its previous shape at all. I mean, companies with the facilities, resources, distribution, experience, and access to capital were better positioned to rebuild, but the scale became an advantage. And over the following decades, national brewing like consolidated basically. The beers that merged were not only beverages, they became a part of everyday American life. You could see them beside a backyard grill, in the hands of fans at a ball game, baseball, or waiting in the refrigerator after a long work week. The brands became connected to occasions and then to memories. The way they had to bounce back, I noticed, is like kind of what we see now. You build the story, you build that personal connection. It's less on the pride side and more about that messaging. And so, this is an important part of beer that numbers alone cannot explain. A beer may matter to someone because it was the beer their father ordered. It may remind them of the baseball game, the fishing trip, or the family gathering. The liquid and the memory kind of become like attached. And that's why debates about beer quality can become so personal. People are not always defending a flavor profile. Sometimes they're just defending a piece of their own memory, their own history, right? The big three understood how to become part of those moments, but their success also created new tension. As national beer became increasingly standardized, mainstream choice narrowed. So American beer culture was enormous, right? But much of the beer available to the average person occupied such a similar range. By the 1970s, like a small group of brewers and home brewers began asking a new question. What else can American beer become? New Albion, I'm probably going to mess that up. New Albion. All right, so New Albion Brewing Company. So they opened in 1976. Yeah, 1976 and closed in 1982. Out of Sonoma. They demonstrated that like a tiny modern brewery could build flavorful beer outside the dominant national system. Then you already know, like we got Sierra Nevada. So Sierra Nevada arrived in 1980 with the whole cone, Cascade hops, and like that bold pine and citrus character that felt dramatically different from like your regulars. So like their most popular, everyone knows the pale ale that they brew is amazing. Sometimes told as though craft beer appeared to rescue America from everything that came before it. I think that version is too simple. Like craft beer did not arrive in a country with no beer culture. We have seen that through history. It arrived in a country with a massive beer culture, established drinking occasions, national distribution by that point, familiar packaging everyone knew, the powerful beer brands I'm talking about today, and generations of consumers who already understood beer as a part of like the American life. You know, everyone talks about hot dogs and beer or hamburgers and beer, right? The foundation existed. What craft beer challenged was the narrowness, though. It reopened the question to flavor. It returned attention to locality, like in the local areas. It invited that experimentation that we all know and love today. It gave small breweries a new identity and gave drinkers more possibilities to explore. Craft beer did not erase the American beer story, it just expanded it. This is why macro versus craft was never has never felt like the most useful argument to me personally. I stay clear of all that because like the more interesting relationship is tradition and innovation, scale and intimacy, right? Um, Consistency and discovery. Like Budweiser showed how a beer could become like that national movement. Miller showed how a beer could like continually redefine the occasion, and Coors showed how strongly a beer could belong to a place. And that's why, craft beer then took those foundations and brought the story back into thousands of communities. And the American drinker kept moving. Like they may not be that may be the most important lesson of all, actually. The crown never stays still. Miller Lite changed the drinker once. Bud Light responded. And years later, Michelob Ultra connected beer with active and balanced lifestyles that became a dominant American brand. I don't know if you know this, but they are killing it right now. Now, the industry is moving into another era built around moderation and non alcoholic beer. This is just the next rabbit hole I'm actually building now for another video. And because it kind of like transitions, I'm trying to like build these videos in like almost like a transition where the one leads to the next because that's how my mind works. I did so much research on this in the last video that like that last video brought my attention to this aspect. Then like that's what I find interesting. And then this led me to the next era of new stuff going on. Like but for today, the story remains with these three, like Budweiser, Miller, and Coors. Like you do not have to call any of them your favorite beer. That's not the assignment. The point is to understand what they built and the history that took them to today. Budweiser helped prove that one beer can become truly national and still remain recognizable across enormous production. Miller helped transform beer into both affordable celebration and constantly evolving consumer categories. Coors turned location and heritage into one of the strongest identities in American beer today. Together, they helped establish the infrastructure, the rituals, expectations, and occasions that made beer a part of everyday American culture. Then craft beer came along and asked America to become curious again. This is not replacement, it's evolution. Domestic beer built the stage, craft beer, like I said, cranked up that volume. And the American beer story is stronger when we understand the entire performance. Now, I want to hear from you. Like, which of the big three was a part of your family story? Was it Budweiser, Miller, Coors? Do you think these beers receive enough respect for what they've built? Even if your drinking tastes have moved somewhere else, drop in the comments. I'd love to hear it. If you've enjoyed this documentary style, like if you enjoyed this, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow along with Brewbots and Barbells over on Instagram. I'm doing a lot of great things with a lot of companies over there. I'm going to keep bringing you the beer history, the industry reporting, the brewery stories, and deeper conversations about what's happening behind the pint. So keep your eyes open, guys. I'm Bennett with Brewbots and Barbells. I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.